con educación ambiental, con todo lo que se relaciona con el desarrollo ambiental y sostenible. Y para mí es un placer presentarlo porque he estado trabajando con él mientras estaba haciendo su sabático aquí en Monteverde, que viene con toda su familia, porque ha estado apoyando al Instituto Monteverde en formas para evaluar el impacto del instituto en la comunidad. Y él ha estado como trabajando muy de cerca con el programa Doctrina Colgada, que es el que yo dirijo, ayudándome a cómo medir ese impacto. Entonces quedan con él y él les cuenta qué es lo que nos va a hablar.
Gracias, Luisa. Gracias a todos por venir. Voy a hacer esta charla en inglés, no en español. Todos hablan inglés. En español todavía está un poco feo. Aunque he estado aquí 4 meses o más. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks all for coming. This is going to be informal. You can stop me anytime. We're going to do this is going to be a little interactive. This is not a new topic for me, but a new talk. So we're working through it. Those of you that teach or talk, you know, like new talks, you're still figuring out the flow. So many new things. But I'm excited to be thinking about this work and think about it with all of you a little bit today. So let's jump right into an exercise and then take a step back. So everybody's got something to write on, and a pencil and a pen. Okay. So what I'd like everybody to do is close your eyes. Take a deep breath or two. Using that DNA that everybody's spreading around the room. You're all now part of each other. So what I want you to do is to imagine what the world looks like in roughly 25 years. So you're doing 2 things. Try and breathe. Maybe the world might be this community or the community to be this. And what you think about what words, images, feels, feelings come to mind. The first things that come to mind. Those words or images or ideas or feelings come to mind. You can just scribble them down.
Yeah.
What's something that you're going to forget? So what the future looks like 25 years from now, medium term. I'm not going to focus on how you think the world should be, just how you think the world is going to be. Where we are today, trajectory we feel like we're on. And just like, you don't need to write a novel. Just write a few words, feelings that come to mind as you think about the future. It could be community or the world. Just to think about.
Si usted cierra sus ojos y pensar un momento en qué sería el futuro en 25 años de hoy. Cualquier palabra
Una
que
imagen de cómo es el futuro, más o menos en 2000. It's not a test. No grading happening. But I do want you to be honest with yourselves about what you see. What does the world look like 25 years from now? If you have a feeling, some feelings that come to mind as you think about that future, those are good to write down too. Give me a little nod. And when you're done, you can just draw a little line under the words that you just wrote. If your mind is blank because it's 10 o'clock in the morning, my mind is often blank. Vamos a hacer eso. We're going to do this the second time. Vamos a hacer. I'll try it. Okay? So when you're ready, I want you to close your eyes right now. This time, when you think about the world, this community, or your community, roughly 25 years from now, 2050, what do you think about what words or images, ideas, or feelings you wish would come to mind when you think about how the world could be? So for some of you, this might be the same set of words, but for others, it may not. This time I want you to think about what words or images, this one's a little bit more cognitive, top down. What do you wish would come to mind when you think about how the world could be 25 years from now? And when that comes to mind, I want you to write those down. We're a small group, but when you're done and the person next to you is done, why don't you just turn to the person next to you, that person's feet, perfect. Just pair up for a second and just compare notes. See if there were any insights or themes that emerged that were shared or different across the two of you. Any differences or similarities across the two sets of words. It's okay if it's the same sets of words. It's okay if they're really different from each other. Just a couple minutes, or just a minute. Chat with the person.
Okay, yo estoy viendo todos. Bueno, los dos para mí eran más espiritualidad visual, pero como el frente de estos como es, eran diferentes. Para mí yo creo que el futuro va a ser hiperlocal, que localidades tienen que mantenernos mucho apoyo del Estado de Nación. Yo creo que eso va a seguir avanzando.
Yo puse algo similar. Yo puse que
I feel like the natural world
yo creo que se va a ver un conocido que sería
I'm just imagining it voluntario. Entonces yo pienso esto más como probablemente, pero en la segunda parte era si podríamos trabajar en autonomía local, eso sería genial, no importa si había un colapso o no. Si no había un colapso, entonces tenemos una forma de local que también está apoyado del gobierno federales, y está apoyado al global y todo eso sigue, pero los locales se cambian a unos espacios regenerativos de curación humanos y más que
Yo no puse ningún ideal.
sí, pero todo depende del pueblo.
Sí creo que la gente sería un mundo más unido y más solidario.
No colapso por colapso, pero casi igual, no importa.
pero no quiero.
Eso puede ser. Pero yo creo que las cosas que estoy pensando es que las localidades que piensan en esta manera tenemos que cuidarnos no importa lo que pasa afuera. Yo creo que podríamos ser más fuertes. Pero eso
Con el manejo de recursos.
sí, pero eso necesita otra forma de gobierno, porque el gobierno es un gobierno que es un cliente del gobierno federal. Entonces ellos no piensan de como generar ayuda de nosotros, ellos solo piensan buscando recursos del gobierno federal y hacen probablemente otra forma
Ya, es que
de
no puede uno ver todo tan
Yo le estaba diciendo
So I never cut you off, but I only have you for another 40 minutes. I like to talk. Okay, just, anybody want to share a couple of things that came up, insights? A little bit of experience?
So I just had written that I feel hopeful and hopeless at the same time about nature positive future, and that the hopelessness part of me is because I feel like I've lost faith and trust in our species, and that I feel concerned about the trajectory, the current trajectory with respect to people, nature, and the planet, and everyone's livelihoods. And that I feel we need more compassion, less ego, and actionable change where all people can benefit in mind, body, and spirit. So I feel like when we are removing ourselves from nature, we're taking away that element and that essence of what it means to be human.
We actually had the same thing, or very similar. One in Spanish, one in English. So that was kind of cool. In English, even better. So we both talked about kind of collapse of resources, both from at the nation state and federal level, and that there's going to be a requirement for localities to take much more control and autonomy of their own for futures. And that there's kind of two ways to go about that. There's one way, if the collapse is like really terrible, to think about it as fortress localities, which is not fun, but, one way. Another way is to think about localities as spaces of regeneration and healing for humans and more than humans, and sharing that knowledge in ways. And then we went ahead and talked about how, either way, there's a need to rethink how we organize ourselves locally in the face of those possibilities. Like, it would be actually beautiful to have be a locality that's regenerative and healing and all those things, so it should be a good thing to aim for, whether there's a collapse or not, or it's harsh or not. But I don't think the current way that local government in its relationship to federal government, this isn't just in Costa Rica, but national, worldwide, is working for localities. And that there's a need to rethink how we organize in that locally. And we both had, like, it was crazy, we both said basically the same thing. Mind though.
That's why I put you together.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody else out there?
Mine's quite similar to that. I think, yeah, there are like real opportunities that come with this kind of compartmentalization, I suppose, and kind of globalization, but yeah, like risks as well. Like, does it come into a kind of fortress, we defend our own type of situation, or can it be something more reciprocal, I suppose? There are big opportunities in that, and I think it will necessitate a bigger connection with the land, with natural resources on a more kind of, direct personal level than we have at the moment. So, there's opportunity in that.
Sure. So one thing, just quickly looking back that I'm hearing, in very different kinds of ways that it emerged, was some sort of gap maybe between where some of us think we're headed and where some of us like to be headed. Right? That the world that it feels like, the path that it feels like it's on right now is not the ideal path, whether it's because of a disconnection from nature, because there's some sort of problem with governance at various scales, where we can envision a different governance structure that could work really well, and that we're heading to something that's going to be changed, but we don't know which of those paths we're on. We don't know whether we're going to take advantage of the opportunities or not. That is what I think at the core of this future imagining or future envisioning, this is what we're trying to get at. So this is a really diverse family of practices. It's been used for a long time. It's been around in conservation and the planning development space for a long time. It happens at various kinds of scales. We can do it at the individual level like we just did. It can be very personal. We're actually going to do one more exercise at the end of today. Some time. It can be everything from what we just did, just thinking about the future, writing letters to the future, to much more kind of collective and participatory types of processing. I would guess that many of you, if not all of you, have probably engaged in some of these sorts of things. Backcasting and future scenarios planning, and we did it at the community scale. And then Monteverde has a history of doing some of these things, maybe haphazardly, but so this is it's like a big umbrella term, future imagining or future vision. And one of the things that it can do for us is to help us mentally construct and inhabit, even if just for a time, the different kinds of futures that we might actually bring about. And we can do this at any time scale. It can be a couple of years from now. When I do this is like one of the hardest things I do for my students at UMass. At the end of every semester, I have them think about where they think they're going to be 10 years from today. It's a hard task for a 22-year-old. They don't have a lot of experiences, so they're supposed to know. But it's a process that it's something they can come back to. It's not something I encourage people to do all the time because it can be quite heavy and hard to do. Or whenever moments of change is a time. So this is something that we can do as an individual to help us inhabit what the future could be. And one of the reasons I think it's really powerful, and we're going to come back to this, is that it's easy for us to just continue down the path that we're on, both individually and collectively, without really thinking about where do we want the path to take us. And we've already heard just from the feedback, just from the sharing back just now, from us being on the conversation, that I think a lot of us that work in the environmental domain, the conservation domain, and the spaces that are at the intersection of environmental sustainability, kind of community development, and justice issues are really worried that we're on the wrong paths, both at the local level and also collectively at the global scale. So why future imagining? Why spend a little bit of time thinking about this, practicing a little bit with ourselves? It can do a lot of different things for us at these different scales at which it can be implemented, right? At the community scale, so much, and I've been here in Monteverde for 4 months, there's so many parallels between here and all the problems back in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's really funny to see, funny/sad to see that there's so many issues, mostly around planning. Like here, as many of you who have lived here know, there seems to be a really tough time getting infrastructure built and to plan, even just in the short, medium term, exact same issues with Amherst. Being able to really think about where it is that we want to head collectively can be really powerful for that. But there are also, at the more individual household community scale, some really big barriers to engaging with big environmental challenges that we face: climate change, habitat destruction, ecosystem loss. And as a behavioral scientist, I've been trained as a behavioral scientist, I think a lot about the things that happen in our minds and our hearts that shape our day-to-day actions. That's like the core. It's the core driving question since I was a teenager. I think maybe because I was a little bit of an outsider. I was always looking around and wondering, why are people doing what they're doing? Not quite understanding. And that's been the theme throughout all of my professional work, is trying to answer that question mostly at the kind of individual level, recognizing that there are lots of systemic and structural forces that shape both our day-to-day lives and our long-term decision making. There's also lots of stuff that's going on in our minds and our hearts, this kind of psychological level. And I think here there's two big challenges that I wanted to briefly go through today with all of you that I see as pretty significant barriers to pro-environmental behavior change and engagement, especially at the individual, household, and community level, that I think future imagining can help us with. One of them has to do with a mismatch between when action has to happen and when the biggest impacts of action or inaction are most likely to occur, and to whom. And the other one is this emotional weight that I think for a long time got downplayed in the environmental domain. The emotional weight, especially for people that are working on environmental issues day in and day out, that we kind of like put to the side and said, look, this is hard stuff, but we're just gonna soldier on. And only in the last few years am I starting to see in my domain, where I work kind of at the intersection of climate change and other environmental issues, behavioral science, mental health, well-being, community involvement, engagement, participation, really since the pandemic, a really big increase in interest in trying to understand, well, how do we support people that want to think about and engage with these issues, both in their individual kind of personal lives and professionally, without burning out and just having to stick their heads in the sand. And I think future imagining has something to offer that problem too. A caveat: future imagining is not going to solve all our problems. Sorry, that is not what I'm going to argue in the next 30 minutes. But I actually think that's also true of all the other kind of levers that we have to try to engage in environmental conservation, to support environmental conservation efforts. Of course, we need better policy, okay? But also, we can look at who's in power in many parts of the world, and even just what the policy process looks like in different places, and recognize that that's a hard route. It's going to take a long time, and we're going to have wins and losses in the policy domain. There's a role for markets, right? Absolutely. Markets are incredibly powerful tools for shaping human behavior, especially at large scale. But again, we have to look at who's captured certain markets. How those markets, right? We don't have unregulated markets anywhere in the world. They're all shaped, and there are winners and losers. So yes, there's potential there. It's an incredibly powerful lever for environmental conservation efforts, and especially for community development and environmental sustainability combined together. But it can't happen in the absence of good policy. It also can happen in the absence of things like education and people knowing what's happening in their world, happening in their communities. there's tons of technological change, and that came up as you guys were talking. And there's no doubt in my mind that technology is going to play a huge role in shaping the world that we're going to live in. Right? I don't think anybody has any doubt about that. We're seeing that happen in real time right now, in both positive and negative ways. So the question of technology is not what technology is necessarily going to develop, but also what paths and who's going to use it and in what paths. And of course, I think there's also a role for persuasion. That is one of the things that has developed the world of behavioral science, the kinds of messaging and the conversations that they have with people to try and shape how they think about orientations. I think future envisioning can help support all of this and set the paths that are more productive and that are aligned with the values that I suspect many of us share around shared goals of just community development and environmental sustainability that works for not just humans but all species now and far into the future. So again, I don't think future visioning is going to solve all the problems, but I think there's an important role for it. Okay, so back to these couple of challenges, especially the kinds of psychological behavioral challenges that I've been particularly interested in my own career. And if anybody has questions about, this is like one little snippet of the work that I do, but if anybody's interested in the work more broadly that I do at the kind of intersection of environmental conservation, human well-being, and decision-making behavioral science, I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm also available for another week and a half. Also, you can find me on Zoom. Okay, not a big surprise, time is not on our side. And I don't just mean that as in, it feels like there's a lot of crises that are happening right now. People are about this poly crisis, that everything's just, all these bad things are happening in the environmental domain, social and political domains. I also mean this at a psychological level and at a community level, collectively, which is that a lot of the issues that we face have these long time horizons. Right? We think about climate change, we think about habitat conservation or destruction. These are things that we're making decisions now that have really big impacts, but the biggest impacts unfold over the course of decades, if not longer. And that's hard for humans. Most of the conservation problems, most of the problems that we have as society, not all of them, but most of them, and the things that have to be done to try and confront them have long time horizons. There are absolutely, and I don't want to discount all of the challenges that are in front of us right now. Like there are so many. But for those of us that are thinking, especially about conservation and environmental issues, a lot of it is thinking about the long term. Right? Why is that hard? It doesn't necessarily seem like it should be hard. Humans actually are unique as a species. We can really do planning. We can think about the future. We can envision it. Why do long time horizons make things hard for us? And not just in the environmental domain, in lots of different ways. One piece of this at the psychological level, when this scales up collectively, is that we discount. We discount, especially over time. I don't know how many people have heard the term temporal discounting. So, very simple terms, temporal discount is this experience or this concept that we value immediate rewards more than those same rewards if we were receiving them in the future. Very simple. Things that have the same value on paper feel less important to us or feel less valuable in the future. I'm going to do a really quick demo because we have enough people in the room. We can do a little quick demo. Caveat, I'm not actually giving anybody money. Sorry, this is all hypothetical. Okay. So, imagine, hypothetically, that I was going to offer you, I'm going to offer you $100. I can give you $100 right now. You can walk out of this room with $100. Or, if you wait, you can do a little bit of work, you can go to the bank. If you wait a month, I'll give you $1,000. I want you to raise your hand if you're willing to wait a month for that $1,000. No, raise it high. Okay, raise it high. Vincent wants $100 right now. No, keep your hands up. Sorry, keep your hands up if you're willing to wait a month. Okay, so Vincent has an extremely high discount rate. Okay, extremely high. So much so that he's willing to give up $900 extra to get the $100 today. That's okay. That's not unreasonable. There might be an awesome concert in San Jose tomorrow night, and he doesn't have ticket money, and the tickets and the bus are going to cost $100, and he doesn't have it in his pocket. He really, really wants to go. So that $100 is worth a lot to him right now. But the rest of you, okay, that's a little. Now, what if it's $500 a month from now? $100, walk out the door, or $500? How many would wait and take the $500 a month from now? Okay. What if it's $250? How many of you are willing to wait a month? And I'm a very trustworthy person. I know I just said I'm gonna leave Monteverde in a week and a half, but I promise I'll pay. Okay, $250 a month from now, or $100. Okay, so a couple of hands have gone down, so some people are just saying, what if it's $200 a month from now? Okay? $150 a month from now, or $100 now? Okay? That's still, you know, for those of you that have your hand down, that's still a pretty high discount rate, right? What if it's what did I say, 100? What if it's $125? How many of you are willing to wait an extra month for the $25? $110. So almost everybody has a positive discount rate. It is actually possible to have a negative discount rate. We'll come back to that. That means valuing the future more than the present. And some people really, really, really care about the future, or they've got something happening in the future, and they actually can show a negative discount rate. But the vast majority of us have positive discount rates. And not only that, there's variation. As we just saw in this room just now, that quick demo, there's variation across people, and there's variation across communities. There's actually variation across some cultural differences too. None of that is good or bad. I have no judgment on those of you that have a discount rate of 90%, and those of you that have a discount rate of 2% or whatever. It's just to demonstrate that we all discount the future to some extent, and we do this in all sorts of domains. And this is what it looks like, mathematically. People have these are just different kinds of discount rates, very high or very low. Right? So if you have a really high discount rate, things that are in the future, they're just not worth that much to you. And it's not just that it's not just worth that much to you, they actually don't feel like it's that emotional pull is less, right? You get less, that's part of what's happening here psychologically. We discount in every domain. It's really interesting research, it's not just money, right? So we all discount in terms of our health, we have different discount rates, right? In terms of how much time we put into our exercise today, right? We're not exercising today. I don't exercise today just to feel good today. Yes, it's good for my mental health. I would like to be active in 10 or 20 years and go backpacking with my kids, right? I think a lot about the future. But many of us are thinking about the long-term impacts of the decisions that we're making in our daily lives. But that doesn't mean that I always eat this like beautiful lunch, especially here in Monteverde. I have been eating really terribly for the last 4 months. There's just carbs everywhere, and the carbs I don't get at home, so I'm like on break, okay? So we discount all sorts of parts of, all parts of our lives, and we have different discount rates, interestingly. We discount differently across different domains of our lives, just as individuals.
Do you think there is a role in which there is some sort of immediate threat that would make people think differently?
For sure.
Or if there's someone think about not just something that they can gain, but something that they can lose.
Yes. So there's a whole psychology of how we perceive, especially risks, in the context of risk, losses and gains, and we perceive them differently. So losses tend to loom larger in our minds than gains do, equal gains in the opposite direction. So yes, I have another demo that I didn't have for you guys today that I do with my students where I ask them to choose between policy A and policy B. I teach natural resource students, mostly classes around environmental social and math. And they're choosing between policy A and policy B. Policy A and then for half the class, and the other half was choosing between C and D. And the only difference between them is the framing. So half are thinking in terms of losses if they choose one over the other. It's like in terms of how much forest can be protected, and the other in terms of how much forest can be protected. And we see total flip in people's perceptions, people's preferences for policies as a function of whether I'm framing the risk as something to be lost or something to gain. So that's a whole other literature. But yes, that will shape and can affect our discount rate and then our subsequent decision making with respect to present versus future costs or benefits in the moment. Excellent question. Yes. Okay, there's another kind of discounting that I just want to briefly mention as well, which comes into play in the context of long-time horizon problems, especially things like climate change, which is that we also discount social needs. This one feels maybe a little bit more icky, but also very natural to us, which is that we tend to just care less about things that happen to other people the farther they get from us socially, right? There's a ton of literature in the moral psychology arena, which I also have been part of for many years, showing that most people tend to care most about themselves, and their family and their kin, their friends and family, their neighbors, their community, the groups that they belong to, all humans, other species, natural ecosystems. Do not take this as like this is actually how it works for everybody. We, in fact, have done some really interesting work, I think it's really interesting over just the past couple of years, cross-nationally, showing that, for example, some people put all species under way, and all animal life way closer to the circle at the bottom. In fact, something like, I think a quarter to a third of people on Earth have circles that it doesn't really quite fit this model that was proposed many years ago. But it is true that we value, in this moral sense, different groups of individuals, people, other species, non-human, non-living things, to different extents. This is something that we all do. Yeah.
Oh, there's something recently, there's a study, I think in the US, that this scans quite closely to like political affiliation as well. Like the further right you go, the I guess the higher your rate of social discounting, and you're more concerned to a higher degree about like your immediate social group, your family, that type of thing. Whereas people to the other end might feel less, like further to the left, might feel less strongly about their own social group, but expand that kind of care, I suppose, to a broader spectrum of people.
Yeah, there are political differences in what we might think of as moral expansiveness or moral inclusion. I'm not sure that they are so big as to overwhelm other kinds of factors that shape our decision making. And also, we can be very sensitive to the measures that get used and how we ask these questions. But yes, there are, and for sure, there are differences across people in moral inclusion and moral discounting. This shows up in all sorts of ways. And it's not that we're always all totally consistent, right? But we tend to be more willing to help people who are closer to us than people who are farther away. Why is this important in the context of environmental issues like climate change or habitat conservation or community sustainability efforts? Well, because the people and species that are going to be most affected are far in the future. So not only are we going to have this temporal discounting issue, we also have some of this social discounting that potentially happens to suppress our willingness to take costly action in the present on behalf of future others. It's not that we can't overcome it. And already, you can probably guess that I think future envisioning can do something to help us overcome some of that barrier. But it's a real barrier. And it's not something that we should just throw out and discount, both in ourselves, but also when we're asking other people to do hard things, or to make sacrifices, or even not necessarily make sacrifices, but just to make different kinds of decisions in the present, where we're making the choices that have these long-term effects. So that's one challenge where I think there's a role for future envisioning. I'm going to try and go fast because we're just going to 11, right? And I do want to have time to write. Okay. The second challenge that I highlighted earlier, or bookmarked earlier, is that it's like I want to reinforce this, especially for folks in this room who might work in the environmental domain in one way or another. The psychological and emotional burden of inhabiting this space of thinking about environmental collapse, climate change, habitat destruction, the loss of species, the challenges that these problems pose both for those species but also for human communities that rely on those natural resources is real and significant. And I have been really happy to see that there's this increase in recognition of just how hard this work can be. Not just for professionals who are doing this today, but for anybody who's worried about these problems, it can be really hard. We're seeing this kind of the stress and anxiety and burnout and despair over environmental issues kind of just zooming up is particularly high amongst youth across the world, which is very concerning. And it's corresponding with all sorts of other crises and threats that have people worried, and a lack of access to mental health and other kinds of supports, or even just informal supports that we used to have, which is connection with one another, networks of people to rely on. So these are concerning numbers to me. Isolation, despair, burnout, these are really serious and growing problems within the conservation world, particularly amongst practitioners that are working. We just have more and more kind of data that's coming in all the time suggesting that these are not problems that we can just ignore anymore. Luckily, I really do think that future matching practices can help overcome or at least address both of these challenges, in addition to lots of other great things that future matching practices can do. Okay, how is that? Well, why do I think that? And I'll show you a little bit of data, but just a little bit. So one thing is that vivid visualization and consideration of future others reduces those distance problems. So this is something that I've spent I've actually come back to this question at a research level for many years now. I think the first paper that I did on this was almost 15 years ago now. And what we've been finding, and others have now replicated many times, is that when we have people think about the future, especially in kind of positive ways, and we have people think about future generations in particular, the distance that we perceive between ourselves and these future others decreases, just like we would hope. You can also do this at the individual level. So there's, in fact, some of what inspired my work 15 years ago was some work showing that if you have people think about their own future self and who they're going to be, and the consistency between, who I am today and who I think I'm going to be in 10 or 20 years, because actually our personality traits tend to be quite stable. It also makes people more willing to save for retirement, to eat better, to exercise more, because we're feeling that continuity and the distance is decreasing. And it makes us more likely to act on our existing care and concern. This is a really important point. The problem is not that people don't feel responsible for the future. This is another set of studies that we've done with my colleague, former Dr. Stelios Siracos, who's at Arizona State now. We've looked at this across many countries, mostly in the US. And we find that the vast majority of people across the globe care about the future. And not only do they care about the future, they think they should be sacrificing and feel a personal responsibility to protect future generations against the worst outcomes of climate change and other problems. So it's not a problem that people don't care. And I think that's really good. There's a little spark of hope. People, and I believe them when they tell me that they care about the future. But these problems of discounting and the problems of the salience of the future just being lower in our day-to-day lives, because there's so many other things for us to worry about, and there's just getting through our daily lives. It can make it really hard to act on those existing concerns. And future imagining can make those future people and places and species feel more concrete and more salient when we're trying to make decisions in our daily lives, both as individuals and as communities, in positive ways. I think part of what we're doing with future imagining is trying to figure out what those ideals are and what they mean for the future that we want to bring about, both individually and collectively. And I think it's really important for us, not just from a pragmatic perspective, in terms of helping to give us a direction that we're trying to work towards, or for backcasting purposes, or for figure out what the path looks like, but also for giving us that kind of psychological well-being and strength that we need to actually do the hard work of making those things happen. And this is a piece of that. And there's other things that we can do to support our well-being, but I think this is one that's easily within reach for many of us. And that's part of why I like it. So I'll leave it there. I'm happy to just talk for as long as people want. Well, until I gotta go get my kid on in 40 minutes. It's only half-day daycare here. Some of you may know. But thank you all for coming. And I hope that was interesting and useful, and feel free to use, if any of that is helpful for folks that are in classrooms or other settings, of course, please use it. I do really hope people will check out the Dear Tomorrow website, and also Art for Public Good. Karen Miller's website, just artforpublicgood.com. She just does such beautiful work, and I always feel very lucky to get to do stuff with her, and we're going to have some new projects launching in the fall, which is really cool, where we're going to actually have Art for Public Good and Dear Tomorrow in a little triangle, and a bunch of community partners. So that's thank you.
Gracias, Ezra. Estoy comenzando con Ezra. Allá arriba hay un pequeño refrigerio mágicamente hecho por mis compañeras. Entonces, pueden subir y está donde está la cosita del café.
Gracias.
Y gracias por venir.
Ay, qué lindo.
And yeah, Vincent, or if anybody else, the slides would be helpful, just send me an email. And
Oh, okay.
just e-Markowitz at UMass.edu.
I came in late, but it was beautiful to just catch up the little bit that I was able to, and to see things like this being happening right now. This kind of reminds me of, oh, this is so necessary. It's like a little, yeah, like a inspiration coming back to the body. Thank you.
That's how I feel working with these folks that do this cool work. Yeah, I get to study it, but there's people doing the work, and it's a big benefit for me.
I have a question about the impact of kind of social media within all of this, because this maps a lot with, you know, some of the studies that have been coming out recently about young people's thinking about their own well-being and the same, you know, the rise of social media and screens at the same time. And I always kind of think about it personally this way, like, if I see something on social media that I feel outraged emotionally by, then I immediately know I'm being played. That's kind of the way I think about it. Or I immediately look and say, okay, how am I being played? How am I, kind of my emotions being engineered? So has there been studies that are seeing kind of there's some involvement there as well in terms of people's thinking about the environment, in terms of their temporal discounting? Like, in other words, if you're outraged all the time and angry, feel for have concern for your own personal well-being based on all that that's coming out to you. Your temporal distance is going to decrease significantly. In other words, you'll be more like me. $100 in the pocket's better than $1,000 down in the future. Has there been any studies or conversations about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, social media is really good for making us angry. And anger is a really interesting, complex emotion in the context of behavior change. And just more broadly, so I've done a lot of work on the role of emotions in shaping the decisions that we make in the context of environmental issues. And unfortunately, there's no like easy answer. So anger can be really powerful, and it can be leveraged and directed towards action, especially present-oriented action and collective action, which can be really powerful, like getting people together because they are angry and they're out in the streets. Then, of course, there's a whole other set of questions around, well, is that productive or not? And what does that look like? And there's different forms, right? There's being very, non-aggressive and non-violent, and there's being provocative. And anger is really good at getting people to be provocative, in particular. But it does also shorten it narrows. It's a narrowing emotion, generally, a focusing emotion. Sometimes that's what you need. I mean, more generally, for any sort of strategy, when I'm thinking about or talking with folks about engagement in environmental issues or collective action or individual level change, I mean, the question is not, oftentimes people say, what's the best thing to do? Like, what's the right message? What's the right emotion to activate? And my response is almost always, it totally depends on what your goals are. Like, if you need people to turn out on November 8th to vote, or whatever the next date is, anger can work because it's a single action and it's a really important action. But if you need people to be engaged over and over again, or in the long term, you want to bring people into a movement. Movements don't survive on anger. Movements survive on love and hope and community. But there also has to be perception of threat, right? If you don't have the perception of threat, and then the perception of efficacy, I think to Kate's question, there's truly something I can do. Not only am I able to just do the thing that you're telling me to do, but also I believe that it's going to have a positive impact and bring about the outcomes that I want. Then the anger or the sadness or the fear or the guilt aren't really going to go anywhere. Like I've done some work on guilt versus hope. And it's not actually a great framing because I think really what matters is to what end and what kinds of engagement you're looking for. And then, so then we can think about the context of social media, and there's just this whole other literature on social media that some of you may know, just about what gets passed along. Things that are more on that negative emotional spectrum just tend to get replicated faster. Also, misinformation propagates much, much faster than the corrections to misinformation. Really kind of order like 10 to 50 times faster. So that's its own separate issue.
Yeah, no, because I'm thinking about, that's a space that we're in where the companies that are kind of getting rich off of social media, they rely on these emotions within the algorithm in order to propagate it and to make money. And that's a pretty hard thing to fight, especially among young people.
Yeah, Mike sort of kind of took what I was going to say. But on the social media front, how do you sustain futures thinking? It's something I just have to like is it repetition? Like we have,
Specifically on social media?
well, just the intersect of social media and having futures thinking be like a sustainable way of thinking. Like how do you sustain that kind of psychology? If people like are not, you know, whether it's the algorithm on social media or just the way, I mean, this is just purely maybe a thought-provoking question. I don't think, I'm not thinking any sort of answer in my head, but it's just something I've wondered
I
about.
don't know if there's
Like, people are constantly getting an influx of
something new.
information
There's
every
something
day,
constantly new.
right? And I feel like sometimes there's even moments where I feel like I know there's a legacy that I wanna leave behind, but then there are moments where I'm like, well, no one else is doing it, why the hell does it matter?
I recommend getting off social media.
No, I don't have a Facebook.
I've been watching what futurists are doing on social media, which is really interesting. Like, one person I've been following is Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an Afrofuturist, wrote a book called Emergent Strategy, and she's really interesting because her book is very like thoughtful, theoretical, kind of the book Emergent Strategy. There's a series of things and very thoughtful work. But her social media is like all about people doing hopeful things. That's all she shares. It's, you know, people singing, people dancing, people speaking, but there's no like deep theory, like, you know what I mean? She's not talking theoretical here. It's just a bunch of people, like every few days there's these reels of people being hopeful and doing hopeful things. And it's almost like modeling in some way, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a role for that, but I just don't think that there's, I don't know if there's something unique about social media and future imagining being different than any other domain where we just need to find ways to get people engaged in thinking about the future. So there might be a role for whatever is on social media that works. You have to fit it into that model. So short and entertaining in some sort of way, or ideally not rage bait, right? That's something that we're positive. It's not the only thing that engages people on social media, but hard to sustain, as opposed to building communities where people can, even if those communities connect virtually and are not in person, I think there's power there. People want to be thinking about what the future looks like together. And rejecting there's plenty of people, you know, selling visions of the future. People with a lot of money online selling the vision of what they think the future should look like. And that's up to us to decide if we want to be accepting those, if we want it. I mean, each of us has to decide on social media what presence we want. You know, if you're a lurker or if you're going to be out there. I'm not a good social media, like, the way I talk, you can all hear, I talk in long sentences. Social media is not, I'm not an influencer.
So you were speaking about those students that were writing messages and then as the temperature gets warmer, you're gonna be able to see those messages. I mean, do they feel good about that? Isn't that like, and I'm just being pessimistic here, like what is that?
I think, so
How is that possible?
So our evaluation of that first iteration of Swarm, suggesting that the students are mostly just having fun drawing messages, and like making butterflies. So I'm actually not so worried about it being, if they're getting so meta about it that they're then becoming depressed. I think for them, part of it is, those of us that work in the environmental domain just vastly overestimate how much other people know and think about these problems. Most people just don't, they're just not thinking about it. And so for example, for these middle school students, this might be their first, in 6th or 7th grade, their first exposure to climate change. And so there's just like little baby steps. And some of it, yeah, for those that are really engaging, I think it would be a mixed emotions kind of process. But also there's that beautiful piece to it and the creative component that I think balances out some of the, if there's recognition, that kind of meta level recognition of, oh right, I'm writing this message about climate change, I'm using this thermochromatic paint that is metaphorically representing what's happening in our world. That could be pretty hard for the person. I think maybe it's offset by the joy and the larger context within which that process or that like practice is being offered to them. think if I just was like, go write out sad messages, and covered in paint, and tell them when it's a certain temperature, they'll be able to see messages, that would probably not be great. I think Carolina is very thoughtful in particular about how to base this practice, or how to think about the future, like a letter writing or whatever, to put it in a context in which it produces a complex emotional response in each of us, right? Like writing these letters to my sons is not just a hopeful thing. It's heavy, and it can be heavy. We're thinking about a future, like who are you going to be in 10 years, right? It's not always happening, and that's okay. I really think that's okay. I think it's really important to consider how these practices of thinking about the future are contextualized, and put into conversation the other things that we're doing to help support people who want to be active or be engaged. But yeah, I mean, there are real, if this is part of what you're getting at, there are serious concerns around climate communication just being so depressing that people stick their heads in the sand. And or that they're so stressed out, like we're seeing with a lot of the youth data, that like it's not great for everybody to be really stressed out all the time. It's not a great, and because the coping strategies for that are not always good. So I think you're hitting on something that's a very important nuance in how to use this kind of work in a way that engages people productively and not counterproductively. And it may not work for everybody, right? There might be somebody who, of the 10 of us, walks out of this room today and is like, not feeling great. And I apologize if that's the case. Just because there's diversity in how we're all going to respond to thinking about or engaging with our stuff. That's part of it.
I'm really interested in there's a head and heart aspect to all of this that's really interesting in terms of drawing the future, writing the future, but I'm also wondering about the kind of somatic part of this that's possible, maybe dancing the future. I know that there was a really cool project that was done last year by Far Corners. What was that called? Where they brought, it was a whole dance in the center of Pedro Negro and in the soccer field, where it was a really terrible thing about littering, and then it shifted and the animals took over and cleaned, and it was a whole thing. It involved dancers and young people, but I wonder sometimes if there's ways to do this in an embodied way with people too, and what that impact would be.
Super cool.
You think it would
Yes,
be?
and I think there's all sorts of, or that you integrate letter writing, and then we like all go out and plant some of those 5,000 trees that you guys are trying to plant.
Do them together.
I was giving away
More
lots
than
of
that.
10,000 trees. Wow. Right, like that you combine these different pieces. I mean, I'm a firm believer that there's absolutely no silver bullet to solving any of the kind of complex problems that we're facing. Like our political problems, our social isolation, our environmental challenges, justice problems. Like there's just no silver bullet.
Yeah.
But there are pieces that we can put together. This kind of like layered approach that addresses different parts of the problem, or the problems, in a way that can move us towards where we want to be at. And it's a long-term thing. That's why it helps to have some vision or visions of where we want to head, as opposed to just be grasped, because it's also, there's a tendency, I think, in the environmental domain, at least I know best, to just grab for whatever feels like it might work and hope for the best. But that there is some combined art and science, which is what I love about this work with Carolina. It's really combining the art and the science, which is also what persuasive communication is, to figure out what might work as we put different strategies together, as we pull on different kinds of levers, and not forgetting about the policy and the markets and the education piece, but then we're putting them all together. And not everybody has to do everything. But that's also why, like, I've been here for 4 months and really got to know MVI and some of the other groups that are working here. And of course, I work with groups all around the world. And part of what is cool about a group like MVI is that it can serve as it doesn't have to do all the work itself, but it can serve as a hub or a core node that all those other, you're the arts person and you're art-based sobre ruedas, but you need some infrastructure. You can come here and integrate with people. Or, you're an EE program whether it's MVI or the E program that's in there, you know, these pieces can come together, and I think there's something really helpful. And not everywhere has a place like MVI. I mean, you all know better than I, Monteverde is a very special, unique place in many ways. But also maybe there's parts of the model here that could be exploited elsewhere. But I think we're seeing more and more of those kind of, like, there's a group that I sat on the board of called the Hitchcock Center in Amherst, which is our local environmental nature climate center. And for the first 50 years of its existence, 45 years, it was like the local nature center, you know, like a couple trails. And now it's transforming into something else under its current leadership, into something that can be more of a node where Amherst, where I live, in the Pioneer Valley, the larger Pioneer Valley in Western Mass, had some of those node organizations in other sectors, like around homelessness or food insecurity, but not necessarily in the environment domain, where you could have an organization that could serve as a hub and start doing more than just in the local community. The Hitchcock Center now does a ton of work in a lot of the cities that are majority renter, majority minority around Amherst, and able to bring resources, but also integrate and provide that extra layer of kind of infrastructure in a way that I think MVI does here, but also to start organizing with those other node organizations to be able to integrate this, and I think there's a lot of power in that. And I don't know who talked about the local communities, but, or yeah, you guys were talking about, hopefully it's the positive future, and not the negative one, but I think a piece of that too is that those, even if it's Monteverde that does feel like, you know, it's on the mountain, it's like it can really get cut off from other places. But that there's connection that gets built between those nodes. So those communities, even if that's the level at which we're organizing 50 or 100 years from now, will do better if it's an interconnected, you know, web of those node communities.
I really like the socio-emotional part of this as well, in the context of Monteverde, because we do a lot of future talking, future thinking, but it's often very argumentative. There's a lot, it's very head focused. You know, my version of the future is better than yours. My understanding or way of understanding the present is more attuned or more intellectual or better sourced than yours. But this, you don't seem to be suggesting that this futuring work is actually, the benefit of the futuring work is the process of doing so. It's not necessarily deciding exactly what future we must go towards. It's understanding that everybody has kind of a socio-emotional place to play in, I guess. Is that what you're saying? Because you're not suggesting we go through these kind of futuring processes and identify the one future, right? You're saying that process of futuring can help people socio-emotionally.
And there are more or less formal, there are formal planning processes that bring some of this in. But yes, I think there's both on the emotional side, but also on the being able to share with one another and have everybody be able to come up with their own vision.
Thank you.
More art. Need more art.
More art.
More dancing.
Somebody's gonna get the letter in 50
Anything that we do to try to there's just this much larger, long social psychological research on the perspective. Anything that we do to try and take the perspective of people